we've seen over the last couple of months that Russia is not able to recruit enough people to replace all of those who are wounded and killed. Almost all Ukrainians understand that however bad it is to live under Russian bombs, it's worse to live under Russian occupation. And while, again, a large majority of senators, Republicans, too, support aid to Ukraine, whether they're willing to cross the president is still a question mark.
Hello and welcome to the Independence Avenue Media. My name is Maria Ulyanovska, and today I bring to you a conversation with John Herbst. He's a former ambassador of the United States to Ukraine and a senior director in the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center. We discussed the current distinctive moment of Russia's war against Ukraine, what is the future of the peaceful negotiations, and why Congress is stepping up in its support to Ukraine. Analysts say that we are sort of in a pivotal moment of Russian war against Ukraine. As we are in this fifth spring of this war, what is your evaluation of where we stand?
I think there is a relatively small number of analysts who think that we are in a pivotal stage of the war. There's no question that the war has moved in a direction favorable to Ukraine over the past 2 or 3 months. And in fact, you could even say it's more than 2 or 3 months, but certainly the last 2 or 3. And there are 3 main aspects to this. The first, of course, on the front line. One, for the last 2 months, Russia has made no gains. Ukraine has made a few small gains, a few hundred square kilometers. But much more important than that, literally for many months, 8, 10, Russian casualties per month have exceeded 30,000, which is very high. Minister of Defense Fyodorov set as a goal putting that at 50,000 Russian casualties a month. And in fact, I believe in April, maybe not all figures are fully in at this point, but we're close, it's well over 35,000. And my understanding from a trip I took to Kiev just 3 weeks ago was that at a minimum, 60% of the wounded are wounded to a point that they can never return to combat, which is a very high ratio of that serious an injury with the wounded. That means if 35,000 casualties, over 19 or 20,000 are not coming back. And we've seen over the last couple of months that Russia is not able to recruit enough people to replace all of those who are wounded and killed, to the tune of about 2,000 short a month. So all of this is very important, right? Because Putin has stated, and sadly we've seen senior American officials repeat this, that Ukraine should give up Western Donbass, which Russia demands, because the Russians will take it anyway, even though the Russians have been conducting this war, this big invasion for 4 years and 3 months and have been unable to take it. The first factor is related to a great extent to the extraordinary drone and AI-related tech of Ukraine's military, or I should say military industry, but working in very close cooperation with the soldiers. So your military industry gets immediate feedback on what weapons work, and that enables them to change it overnight in ways that benefit your operations. The second is what Ukraine's doing to Russia's strategic industries as a result of this extraordinary drone technology. They have taken out as much as 40% of any one time of Russia's oil refinery capability. Not to mention the havoc that Ukraine is wreaking on Crimea, and this has immediate strategic value for the war, on the land bridge, the highway, and the railroad connecting occupied Donbass to Crimea. So we're beginning to see some limitations placed on supplies to Crimea. This is very dangerous for the Russian presence there. It would mean that they would have to give up Crimea. It would mean, we already see that Russia is not able to conduct the drone operations from Crimea that plagued Ukraine in 23 and even 24. And also Russians living in Crimea who are not soldiers are not too happy about this, and they're complaining. So that's the second factor. And the third factor is economic impact of the strikes on oil and such. The Russian economy has been in difficult circumstances for a couple of years. The U.S. strike on Iran has led to rising global oil and gas prices, and led the Trump administration to temporarily suspend its sanctions on Russian oil, which is a plus for the Kremlin. But despite that, their economy still is stuttering because it's just in very difficult circumstances.
We are talking the night after a huge
Correct.
drone and rocket attack
I'm told
on
it was
Kyiv.
actually the largest since the big invasion began.
The devastation is tremendous. A lot of people have died, a lot of civilians. So Russia still has that drone and ballistic rockets capacities to attack Ukrainian civilians. Do you think Ukrainian civilians feel that this is a better moment?
I think you'd have to ask the Ukrainian civilians. Now, I came back from a 6-day trip to Kyiv just 2.5 weeks ago. And certainly everyone I spoke to, and I'm not just talking about like officials or deeply political Ukrainians, but people, Uber drivers, people in restaurants and so on, there's no question that they felt better about their circumstances than they did certainly during the winter. The Ukrainian people have suffered greatly since the war began, and especially since the big invasion. But as a Ukrainian politician from Kherson, who spent many weeks in a Russian prison, said to me that almost all Ukrainians understand that however bad it is to live under Russian bombs, it's worse to live under Russian occupation. And the Ukrainian people have demonstrated a remarkable resilience because they want to live freely as Ukrainians, which under Russian occupation is impossible, because the Russians are trying to stamp out a Ukrainian identity along with the Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture, and the Ukrainian religious life. The average Ukrainian can see what I can see, which is that the Russian bombing is all about making it painful for the Ukrainian people to live. Ukrainian bombing is not going after Russian people per se. It's making it harder for Putin to continue this war. And you've now reached a point where a bunch of very high-profile Russian vayenkuri, right, the war bloggers, are saying Russia can't win this war.
So that is my next question to you. Considering the circumstances that you've just described, how safe is Putin's regime in Russia?
Well, we did an event last Friday talking about the clear signs of stress in Putin's regime. And they include some of the things I've already mentioned, but I'll put it in order. It starts with the fact that this special military operation, which was supposed to be over in weeks, has now been going on longer than World War II or the Great Patriotic War for Moscow. And while as recently as 6 or 8 months ago, Russian elites and the war bloggers spoke as if Russian victory was still inevitable, despite the fact they haven't managed it in over 3+ years of fighting. Now, again, some of the war bloggers are saying publicly, this can't be won. There's been very little criticism of Putin on anything. And lately, there's been criticism of him personally, first on the war. So that's the first thing. Problems on the war, the fact that people are seeing it, like I've seen, a Russian woman who lives in Tuapse, right, the city that was bombed, whose oil was bombed, complaining how people used to envy her for living on the Black Sea. Now it's hell because it's raining oil, and this is being picked up across Russia, or parts of Russia. So the war and consequences of a not successful war is the first problem Putin has. The second, again, I mentioned it before, the economy is in poor shape. That's due, one, because Putin does not know how to steward an economy. The only thing he knows how to do is to build up a reserve, a fiscal, financial reserve. But it also has to do with the war, and also the damage that Ukraine is truly, to a growing measure, a significant measure, inflicting on the greatest source of Russian foreign currency, which is oil and gas. A truly smart bombing campaign, not making Russian people suffer, making the Russian war machine starve. The third reason is reacting to all this. Putin has increased repression. Again, most importantly, in terms of public impact, seriously limiting telegram channels and the internet. And Russians are complaining about this on its own merits. Senior people in the economic area say the Kremlin's out of touch with the economy. Nahi Bulin, right, the whiz at the bank in Russia, has a very strong reputation among Western economists, saying that, and also some prominent Russian business people saying the Kremlin is out of touch with the economy. So that's direct criticism of the Kremlin. So these are all signs of a weakened regime. You have people like Khodorkovsky saying that people in the FSB and other organs are really unhappy about the state of governance in Russia. And, well, that could mean an effort to change it. I'm not predicting that's going to happen now, but I would not be surprised if it happened either tomorrow or a year and a half from now or 2 years from now. It was clear to me back in November of 2022, as I watched Prigozhin, right, the head of Wagner, exchanging criticisms with Shoigu, then the Minister of Defense, Gerasimov, the top general then and now, and Kadyrov. I said, this is not what's supposed to happen in a stable authoritarian regime. And then 6 or 7 months later, we saw the attempted coup.
I would like to move on to the peace negotiations. There is a perception that if a peaceful settlement is not reached till the beginning of the summer, it will be increasingly difficult to bring it back to the attention because of the US midterm elections. How do you evaluate the US brokered peace negotiations that has been happening over the past year and a half between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, they haven't gone very far, is clear for all to see. And to a large extent, it's been only a negotiation between the United States and Ukraine. Russia, to this point, has not clearly changed the goals Putin established when he launched it, which I summarize as he wants political control of Ukraine. Members of his regime have talked about having control of territory all the way to Transnistria, right, to Moldova. And they are not going to be satisfied with simply Western Donbass, which for some reason the Trump administration thinks is all they want. You've had a negotiation which has not clearly sought Trump's goal of a stable peace. Because when Trump came into office, he said he wants a stable peace. It's based upon roughly the lines of where the armies were at the time. And the lines today are not much different than they were when Trump became president for a second time. And Trump also said, if one of the parties blocks it, I will put major pressure on them. And of course, there's only one party blocking it, and Trump has put some pressure on it, meaning the sanctions on Lukoil, but then of course he temporarily removed them because of Iran, which actually I understand. So he's been reluctant to put the pressure where it's needed. And that's why the negotiations haven't gone very far. But I disagree with my colleagues, and there are others who, along with me, disagree with the majority of our colleagues, that Trump intends to make it easy for Putin to take Ukraine by insisting on terms Zelensky would never accept and forcing him to accept it. I think, again, the notion that Ukraine should hand over, Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, is foolish for Ukraine. It would be existential danger for Ukraine and actually foolish and dangerous for the United States. But Trump has not put any serious pressure on Ukraine to actually do that. Although what I hear is that the Russians complain that Trump's not doing that.
Marco Rubio recently has said that he hopes that these negotiations will resume. Do you see that there is a settlement to be reached before the midterm elections hit?
Well, I don't have any doubt that Trump could make a good run at achieving the stable peace that he wants. And he'd have to do that by following up on the statements he made over a year ago. And if, by the way, even when he put the sanctions on Russia in October, that was consistent with those statements, which is, I'm going to force the party, which is the belligerent party, to make peace. Were he to do that, the problems in Putin's economy would grow worse. And if he were to couple that with working to hand over to Ukraine the remaining $210 billion or euro value of the frozen Russian assets, that would put a major, major strain on Putin and his war effort. But thus far, Trump has been reluctant to do that, and the U.S. position on the frozen assets remains very peculiar. Not one that, in my judgment, suits American interests, or NATO interests, or EU interests, or, of course, Ukrainian interests. Only Russian interests.
So there is now a congressional momentum for additional aid for Ukraine?
Looks like it.
There has been a bill that has recently gathered enough signatures, 218, in the House of Representatives, including 2 Republican signatures, Don Bacon and Brian Fitzpatrick, to bypass Speaker Johnson and vote for additional aid for Ukraine. What do you think this signals in terms of the U.S. support for Ukraine?
Well, it's always been clear that a very large majority of Americans, which includes a majority of Republicans, a larger majority of Republicans, and even a majority of MAGA Republicans, believe the United States should help Ukraine, believe we should give aid to Ukraine the way we did before Trump came back into the White House, and believe that Putin is a disreputable, dangerous figure. Like 83% of Americans believe that. Trump's view has been somewhat different, as we know. But he has been, at least amongst Republicans, a very powerful and popular figure. Or I should say popular and powerful. The power comes from the popularity. But I think one of the reasons why you now have this pass is Trump's popularity has dropped a lot. While he's still popular among Republicans, the amount of that popularity, the support for him is less, largely as a result of the complications in the Iran war, what that's meant for oil prices or gasoline prices in the United States. So that's how I interpret that vote, that it was done, it was passed. You had at least 2 Republicans voting for it, even though far more Republicans actually would like to see it, because Trump's ability to control the party it's still there, but it's weaker. It's not much weaker, but weak enough to get that squeaker of a vote, and probably weak enough to ensure a majority, now that they'll be voting on actual aid to Ukraine, to pass that vote. And so that's obviously, I think it's a plus for the United States. It's clearly a plus for Ukraine.
So far, it's enough signatures to put it on the vote in the House of Representatives. What do you think is the prospect of this legislation in the House of Representatives than in the Senate? And do you think that more Republicans will vote for it if it's put on the vote?
I don't rule out more Republicans voting for it. One, because again, Trump is not as strong as he was 4 months ago. And if it comes to a vote 2 months from now, and the Iran war is still going on, and oil prices, instead of being as they are today at like $4.40 a gallon, at $6 a gallon, even less support for the president will be evident in Congress. And again, Americans, generally speaking, support this. So I don't have any doubt that the House will get a majority to vote for it. The Senate is not as certain because there are all sorts of procedural rules in the Senate. And while, again, a large majority of senators, Republicans, too, support aid to Ukraine, whether they're willing to cross the president is still a question mark.
President Trump is now on his official visit to China. What do you think is there on the table for discussions between President Trump and President Xi around Ukraine and Russia?
Trump understands that Russia and China act as partners. And the idea of someone's administration to somehow hive off Russia from that partnership with China, sadly, those who think that way in the administration think the way to do that is to offer gifts to Putin, which is exactly the wrong way to go about this. You want to split them off, make it very painful for Russia to continue the war, make him give up the war in Ukraine, and then we have a conversation about how we deal with Chinese claims on Russian territory.
Do you think China might potentially be a meaningful side in the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think that the Chinese foreign minister laid out the Chinese view with Madame von der Leyen a few months ago when she said it's not in China's interest for Russia to lose this war. And I think that's absolutely right. So they don't want it to happen. They like to present themselves as a neutral party, but we all know that's nonsense. Because at the same time, they talk about their magnificent relationship with the Kremlin. And the Kremlin talks about that relationship even more. And most importantly, we've yet to see China take any step that makes it harder for Putin to conduct his war. Although I guess it is true that at one point, at least a couple of years ago, when Putin was spouting about nuclear use, China told him that's not a good idea. So I would credit them for that.